You should get a little thing in your screen now, and you should just be able to hit yes or accept, and then you're into the mix. And I see you popping up now. I see our friends.
My man.
Boom. There you go. I knew you'd figure it out. Hey, and, like, you got some hair going right now, buddy. Wow. You got the flow happening.
You know what? I got the flow. You're right. You know what happened was I did the old nighttime work. I'm doing 2 days now. Like, what else are you going to do? I did the nighttime workout, and then, I just got out of the shower, and away you go. That's it. Nighttime flow.
I love it.
Although I could,
All right.
I could go with this. Maybe I'll go with this.
Hey.
Is that better?
Doesn't get better than that, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Now, I want to start from the beginning here.
Oh, boy.
Okay? But before we do that, because I know there's a lot of people right now that have been watching Sportsnet, watching Game 2 of the finals, watching the rerun of the entire playoff run on the 2 sports channels. So let's start there for a couple minutes, then we'll circle back to it. But I want to start with you, because part of the reason I wanted to do this show, Maddie, is we work with, both you and I and anybody kind of in the industry, we work with so many talented broadcasters, writers, let alone the players, the coaches, whatever else. And we get a chance to interact with folks from the entertainment world and whatnot. And I wanted, hopefully, if I was able to get people to come on, to kind of tell their story as well, because we don't necessarily get to find out about what brought you to this point or all of the groundwork and all the layers that were put down to get you to where you are now. So I wanted to get into all that. But before we do, because people are coming over maybe from the broadcast. What's that?
Do you have a couple days?
Hey, I'm going to have you back as a second guest if we're on lockdown for 2 or 3 months, My guest pool might dwindle a little bit. Talk to me for a moment here about the finals. Game 2 went tonight. It's the one the Raptors lost, but they easily could have won. And it certainly sets up the 1-2 punch that ultimately came in Oakland with the Raptors taking the 3-1 lead.
Well, I think when you go back and you look at that Game 2, to me, it's really about what happened after Game 2 in the locker room. When Nick Nurse goes into the room and he says, they got one here, let's go to Oakland, let's grab one there, come back, we have home court advantage, right? And the best player on the roster, best player in the postseason, said, you know what, man, a few words. Instead of going to get, forget that, let's get them both, right? And that, of course, was Kawhi Leonard. That, to me, set the stage and the tone for going to San Francisco. And as you well know, it was interesting because they were phenomenal on the road throughout the postseason. It's almost like you're in self-isolation, you're quarantined, you're away from everybody. They were in that hotel. They were separated from a lot of what was going on, the demands of what typically you have when you're at home. And then you take the bus over the Bay Bridge, and there's Oracle, and, away you go. And the Raptors took care of business Game 3 and 4. But I think, to me, there's so many moments, Eric, throughout the postseason. And that, to me, was a huge one when Kawhi obviously said what he said.
There's some people writing in the comments what he said. I think we all know what he said, but we're keeping it clean. If people want to write,
it's a family show.
I can't control the comment. I mean, I think I can. I could probably shut them off, but I want people to be able to respond. And as I said last night on the first episode with Elliot, and I'm saying this more so to those that are watching.
Elliot was your first guest.
Well, I explained why. Do you want me to explain it to you?
No, it's fine.
You probably. I'll quickly tell you the story. If it weren't for Elliot, I don't know if I'm where I am right now. Because Elliot leaves the Fan, goes to Headline Sports, goes to the Score, and the rest is history. But one of the things I said to Elliot last night, Maddie, and you'll kind of find this out, is as we're talking here for the next 30, 40 minutes or so, or hour.
How long are we talking?
You're on till 11.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you're not big enough to bail early. You're staying for the full hour.
Wait a minute. I thought I was on for like 5 minutes.
No. This is the Matt Devlin retrospective, man.
Oh, Oh
We're
my
going
God.
deep. I'm going to try and make.
Let me turn on the TV.
I'm going to try and make you cry like Oprah before the end of this. All right.
Oh boy.
One of the things that I was saying, though, as I've tried now for the third time to say it, it's hard to talk to you and kind of remain, eye contact through the camera and also look down and try and read all the comments coming. So it's folks, it's not that I'm ignoring you or ignoring the comments or questions. I'll try to quickly scan down, but I'm here to chat to Maddie as well, and I'll see if I can incorporate some of your stuff as I see it as we go here. Now that we've talked, though, about the Raptors and championship, and I promise, folks, we will circle back to that. Maddie, I want to start with you and the start of the career, because a lot of people that are watching, they're young journalists, they're young journalism students, they're folks that are maybe wondering how it all starts. And folks might not realize that before the Toronto Raptors and before the Charlotte Bobcats and, before the Memphis Grizzlies and the WNBA, which we'll get to all that too, there was minor league baseball, riding on the bus, slugging it out in the minor leagues before the big chance ultimately happened. Maybe you can kind of give us a sense, Maddie, of where it all started for you coming out of university.
Well, first, it is and I tell this to aspiring broadcasters all the time. No journey is the same. And just because my journey was this way, it doesn't mean that your journey has to be that way, right? You grew up in Burlington and you went to Humber and you stayed here in Toronto. That's one move. My family and I have moved some 15 times. And part of that was because when I came out, sorry, I'm going to use one of these earpieces here. When I came out of university, when I went to school, I didn't know this is what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to play, right? And then you realize you're not good enough. And then you realize that you really need to start thinking about what you're going to do after. And always in the back of my mind, I thought about doing television sports. But at first in the U.S., as you know, back in the day, pre-ESPN, it was all about I'm laughing now about Anchorman, but it was about the local anchor in sports. And when I went to high school in Nashville, Tennessee, actually, the local weatherman was Pat Sajak, interestingly enough. But there was a local sports anchor by the name of Charlie McAlexander, and I just thought he had the coolest job. He was the Monday through Friday NBC sports anchor, and then on the weekends he called Vanderbilt University football. I mean, how cool is that? And in the back of my mind, I always thought, that'd be something, So my senior year of university, I actually tried out for the local school TV station. I got cut. I didn't even make it through the first round. I did get an internship at a television station. I graduated. By that time, my parents actually were living in Texas, and I moved back down to Texas. I was working, like a lot of kids getting out of school, you're working a lot of side jobs, right? I was working at a men's clothing store. I was working at a bike shop. I was doing all sorts of different stuff, right? And I was also working for free at as an intern at a local affiliate, an ABC affiliate. Anyway, and we have an hour here, so I'll give you the long version of it.
Please do.
No, so when I was a senior at university, a guy said, go to a small market and work your way up. Okay. And so when I went back down to Houston, there was a gentleman who has since passed who was very influential by the name of Bob Allen. And he was great because he allowed me to do some on-air stuff there. Obviously not live. It would be live to tape. And then back in the day, you're sending out these big tapes, like 3/4-inch tapes. And there's no emails. There's, picking up a phone, calling a news director. And I had in the U.S., I don't know how many markets there were. There was over 200 markets. And so I took market 100 until market 200 and whatever. And I would send out all these tapes and pick up the phone every day. And there was an opening in Abilene, Texas at the ABC affiliate. And I call and I get a hold of the news director. And the news director said, you know what? I just filled that spot from across town. I hired away the NBC affiliate anchor. And so I picked up the phone immediately, called up the sports director there, and got a job in Abilene, Texas, which is about 3 hours west of Dallas, for $5 an hour as a weekend sports anchor, and weekday sports reporter. Plus, you're shooting film, you're doing everything. Right?
Yeah.
And that got me into the business. And it was during that year, I was there for about 18 months. I'll never forget watching Later with Bob Costas, which was a show that actually aired like at 1 a.m. Yep. We didn't even carry it. We were bars by that time in Abilene, okay? But it was in the control room, and I was staying around to watch it because they had Vin Scully on, and I wanted to hear Vin Scully. And so it was as if they were talking to me about being a broadcaster, and they were saying that if you really wanted to be a great broadcaster, you needed to spend time calling baseball because of all the time that you had to fill, right? So that led me into trying to get into baseball. And I got an internship, so I left that job. I got an internship in 1992 for $3,000 with the Springfield Cardinals, which were then in the Midwest League. They had Dimitri Young. You remember Dimitri Young?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He played for them in 1992. They had a good team that year. And I was a number 2 radio announcer. And I had never called play-by-play in my life. And so before putting me on the air, the general manager, Lee Landers at the time, who said, you're just not any good. You need to go get a cassette tape at Radio Shack with a microphone and sit in the stands and start practicing calling games. And I did a host of other things there, handing out hats and pulling tarp on the field when it rained. I mean, all those sort of things, right? And I was able to get a tape there. The season ended. I went back to Texas. I started calling high school football and basketball games for $75 a game, which I'm still owed. I'm not going to call the guy out, but the guy didn't pay me for the last game. You owe me $75. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity in 1993 to call the Palm Springs Angels. Now, I went out there for the interview, and I was the last guy out there for the interview, and it was a night of their auction. And they had, they actually had a lot of, they were an affiliate of the California Angels. In fact, it was great. I was with the California Angels organization for 3 years and became buddies with Joe Madden, who's currently back with the Angels. And he was a roving instructor in the minor leagues at that time. And so I get interviewed for the job. It's a Friday, and they have the Palm Springs Angels auction that night to raise money. I said, hey, do you need any help? And they're like, oh, yeah, go. Can you pick up Leonard Coppett at the airport? I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. He's a great baseball writer. Long and the short of it, I didn't realize I had to drive all the way to L.A. from Palm Springs to go get him, which is an hour and a half ride. But the hour and a half back was a great ride because I got to hear a lot of baseball stories. And then that night I worked the auction. And I'm thinking, I got this job. I get a call from the general manager on that Sunday. I'm back home now. And he actually says, we picked somebody else over you. I was devastated. And, you're bawling. I mean, like, I can't believe it. Like, what else could I have done? And the next day he calls me back and says, the guy that I offered the job to didn't take it. And so, you want it? And I said, yes. When do you need me? He goes, this Friday. So I packed up everything in my car, which wasn't much. And I drove out to Palm Springs, and that team moved to Lake Elsinore, California. I spent 2 more years there. Then at that time, that's when I really started to branch out. I started doing University of California Irvine basketball games, actually as an analyst first for $25 a game for Dimension Cable. I was hosting radio shows, doing all sorts of things. But the great thing about baseball is that it gives you a platform. There's 142 games. And during those 142 games, you're broadcasting the game solo, Eric, and you're broadcasting for 3 hours. And it allowed you every day to be in the booth to get better. And so that was a great platform. And then from there, I added in basketball, football, and all the other things. And then, I was up for a lot of different jobs that you don't get. I mean, I think I kept every rejection letter I ever got. I mean, the stack is that thick. And I ended up getting the job with the New Haven Ravens in Connecticut, which was then the AA affiliate of the Colorado Rockies, Todd Helton, all those guys. And once I got back there, they had a lot of D2 schools, Division II schools and stuff. I started calling basketball for them. And that really was great because that was able to get me the tape that you need, right? So sure. in addition to calling games, like for a minor league team, you're also selling advertising. You're doing a lot of other things. Your responsibility isn't really just broadcasting. In fact, the general managers and the ownership groups that own the team, actually, that's like the smallest part of your job, right? You have to do a lot of other things. But I was doing football. I was doing basketball, radio, really just trying to get better at that time. And I'll never forget one of the most pivotal points, and there's always one or two along the way, and sometimes even more. I was broadcasting. I created a deal with Sacred Heart University. They're now a Division I school. At the time, they're a Division II. And I had radio equipment. I had a radio station in town, WMMM, that was willing to broadcast. I didn't want to sell. At that time, I was already selling for the minor league team, sell the air, the spots, right?
Yep.
The commercial spots. I just said to him, hey, look, you sell, all I want is $200 a game. You sell them all, right? Or I think it's $100 a game, actually. It's $100 a game. And you sell them all. And I got the equipment. We got the radio station. You and the radio station split the airtime, right? And I'm just going to work on my craft to get better. After the second game, the athletic director, Sacred Heart, Don Cook, comes to me and says, we can't afford you. I said, you only have 28 games. It's $2,800. Like, you can't sell $2,800 worth of advertising? Like, come on, right? He said, I can't afford you. I remember going home. First of all, he owes me $200. That's $275.
I got to start writing this down for you here. All these people that owe you money.
Don't worry. I know exactly. And so I go home, and I was Erin, who my wife, who's been a great support throughout all the ups and downs, as you know, in a broadcasting career. And she said, Matt, what's more important, the $100 or actually getting back then? There's audio cassette tapes, you remember, right? And you had the Marantz, if you're lucky, you had a Marantz, right? The big Marantz, and you put it in there, and you're dubbing tapes, and you're doing all that stuff to get the tape, that little audio cassette tape to send out to get a better job, right? And I said, you know what, you're right. The most important thing isn't the $100. It's really getting that tape so I can get a job,
Yeah.
And I went back to him and I said, hey, Don, I got a deal for you. I'll do all the games that I can drive to, the home games and anyone that are in Connecticut. And then, the other away games I won't do. And so I would work selling advertising and stuff like that for the minor league team during the day. And at night I'd go call games for free. But those tapes did help me. It helped me get UConn women's basketball on WTIC, 50,000 watt station. I filled in for the UConn men's team, calling some games, big games, UConn against Michigan State, UConn against St. John's at Madison Square Garden. So there's some key moments ESPN hired me to do minor league baseball, all-star game. That was key. And then you need somebody to really step up. And that was a gentleman by the name of Pete Silverman, who was hired from Sports Channel, New York, to run Madison Square Garden Network Radio. And he hired me to do the New York Liberty on radio, plus New York Knicks pre-post fill-in on radio, plus New York Yankees pre-post for specific times, postseason runs, sometimes during the regular season, kind of that spot duty. And then also on MSG, I would be doing Northeast Conference basketball and a few other things. And so that really started it all. And then in 1999, really one of the big breaks, and I'm leaving out so many other different side stories, which is hard to believe, but since I have another 5 hours to talk.
Well, hold on. I'm going to cut you off for 1 second.
Wait a minute.
Just to make the point, you said about 14 minutes ago, am I on for the entire hour? You just gave me about a 14-minute answer, which I don't mind. This is great. I'm loving all the details. But, I think we're going to be fine filling now the next 36 minutes. I think I only have to ask 2 more questions, and we're good to go.
Well, I'm giving you the story. It's a long story. It's not. That's why, some of it, but now you're going to know all of it. But so
1999.
1999, really kind of the big break, and it kind of ends after that, was the senior vice president of NBA Entertainment hired me to work NBA TV. And that gentleman's name was Adam Silver at the time. And he hired me to work NBA TV. It was just starting at the time. And so that's what got me into the NBA. And from there, I continued to do, because I was an anchor at that time with NBA TV, but I got to do summer league games. And then also I continued to broadcast for like ESPN on a freelance basis, Atlantic 10 Network as well. And that really kind of became, which is hard to believe that it's over 20 years ago, the launching point.
A couple of things that stand out, certainly the Adam Silver connection there. But I'm going to circle back just a little bit here. When you talk about working at MSG and doing, Knicks, Liberty, etc., I think you've told this a couple times, but for those that are watching that haven't heard the story, I know he works on the other side at TSN, but he used to be a Sportsnet guy, and hey, we're all one big happy family in the Raptors broadcast crew. It's funny when you think now, as you go forward 10, 15 years later, when you come to Canada and you're calling Raptor games, you already had that chemistry and that familiarity with Jack Armstrong because of back in the late 90s at MSG and working the Liberty game. So maybe you can kind of tell that story to the audience and to the folks watching in terms of how you guys kind of, got your start together and working with Jacko way back when.
Well, look, there's always people that step up along the way, and I got to know Jack when we were doing New York Liberty games. Doris Burke, I did New York Liberty games with Doris as well. DB and I also did Atlantic 10 Network games. Mike Breen was pivotal. You always need one guy to make a call back. I was driving one day. Mike Breen was calling me, and Breen picked up the phone and said, "Hey, you'll be getting a call from Bob Stites." He goes, "I'm going to be doing New York Knicks now full time, and I'm not going to have time to do Atlantic 10 Network TV games." And he was asking about you, and I said, this is a guy that you should look at, and so he was pivotal as well. But Jacko and I have known each other for that long. And then interestingly enough, even above and beyond that, I have 2 of my brother-in-laws, Aaron's brothers, who are NCAA Division I coaches, and Jack and Aaron's older brother, Ed, who's currently at the University of Minnesota as the associate head coach. They actually had worked camps together going back even beyond that. So, he's known Eddie since, they were both in their early 20s, right? So there was always a connection. And then, obviously, when Chuck decided to leave to go to Chicago, this opening came up, and I was very fortunate. It's all about who you work with at a certain level, right? We spend so much time together. You're like family, and you're like a brother, and Jack's like a brother, and Leo's like a brother, and you get so close to everybody. And I know about, obviously, your wife, your son, everybody. My family, my boys. It's the same thing. And with Jack, obviously, coming here, it was an easy transition because I knew Leo and I knew Jack, and I had worked actually with Jack. I hadn't worked with Leo yet, but I had already worked with Jack. So it's just fun. It's hard to believe this is my 12th season, and it's gone by. It's gone by in a hurry. I'll tell you that.
You mentioned family, Matt. Ellie and I kind of chatted a little bit about this last night. I was, both my parents, thankfully, luckily, both of them still alive and still doing well and healthy and everything else. My dad was a steel worker at the Fasco in Hamilton. My mother was a grade school teacher. This, journalism broadcasting was certainly not in the blood, in the family line by any means. And I think about you and I don't want to get too personal here. I don't know what details you care to share, but it certainly wasn't something, when you think about your brother, your parents, what they did. You're talking about the lineage now on your wife's side and in-laws that are coaches and whatnot. Where did the broadcasting bug come from? Where did it start? How do you think it developed? Aside from what you already said, where it was, like a lot of us, at a young age, I'm not good enough to play. What's the next best thing? Talking about it. But, was there a little push even at a young age? Or how do you think that you strayed from what the rest of the family was maybe doing to just kind of your own niche and find your own mark?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. Number one, you always, I think most announcers want to play, right? And then they realize, hey, you can't play. Hey, how do I stay around it? And the last baseball team I played for, I was 20 and I got cut. And I knew at that time, it's not going to happen. And I had gotten in basketball in high school. I got cut. And so I knew, hey, look, that wasn't going to work, right? But where does it all come from? It's a good question. Number one, I have a passion for sports. It's all I ever really cared about. When I would, as a kid, get the paper, I only went to the sports page and I only looked at transactions. I couldn't tell you anything about the stock market. I couldn't tell you anything about economics. And that was all, all I talked about was sports. And, my dad and I talked a ton about sports, and my brother obviously loves sports. And, we, spent, time going to football games and basketball games and baseball games. And although where we were living, not all the time did they have professional sports teams. And so you'd go see semi-pro teams or college teams or whatever it may be. So there was always a passion for sports. And then where does that whole other piece of it come? That's a good question. My mother, who you've met, actually was an actress when we lived in New York City. And so I've thought about this recently. Maybe that's, she worked off Broadway. And when my father got transferred with his job out of New York, ended up, working a little bit more, but then it became obviously more and more difficult as we moved around to continue to do what she was passionate about. And she sacrificed a lot, obviously, for our family. But, as a kid coming home, I remember, always, she would be practicing her lines and doing those sort of different things and be in costume and all that sort of stuff. So maybe that was it. Maybe that was something. I remember going to plays that she was in. Maybe that was something that in the back of your mind you think about. Maybe there's a tie there. I don't know. Maybe I need to go to a psychiatrist to figure that out. I don't know.
This is it. This is it right here, buddy.
But I will say this. One of the, there's a couple of really cool stories, if you don't mind. In 1993, it was an off day. I was working with the Palm Springs Angels, And on the off day, I drove into Anaheim, then Anaheim Stadium, California Angels. They were taking on the Toronto Blue Jays. And I got a media pass. And I would always, on those opportunities, go in and listen to the home broadcaster. He was Bob Starr. Billy Sample worked on the radio side and then I would spend time on the radio side with the visitors, and I would ask. And it was Tom Cheek and Jerry Howard. And it was a highlight because Tom was exceptional. I went in, Mr. Cheek, Matt Devlin, broadcaster, single A team, Palm Springs. And would you mind if I sit in the back of the booth and just listen to you? And he was so gracious. At that time, of course, there's not computers and all the other different things, but he showed me how he kept handwritten notes on everything. I copied that for the rest of my career in baseball. He ripped out his page in the back of his scorecard book, and he said, "Hey, I got this from Jack Buck. I modified it. Hey, here's this to use." He was great. Jerry said, "Hey, send me a cassette tape. Let me know, here's my address, and I'll put some thoughts together and send it back to you." I still have that letter to this day, and I've shared this story, obviously, with Jerry. It was really cool because, as you know, over the years, I'll fill in on Blue Jays games. And I have to say, I've done Major League Baseball games on national TV in the U.S. and the NFL on Fox in the U.S. and obviously, working here and doing the NBA Finals. But one of the great thrills, just from a personal standpoint, was stepping into the Blue Jays booth because of that connection and how great Tom and Jerry were to me as a 23-year-old, back in the day.
It's funny when I think about the fact that we work alongside Sherm, who played for the national team, and Leo, who played and coached for the national team, played in the NBA, and Jonesy all of his years in basketball at the high school, collegiate level, university level, coaching as well. In the GTA, York University, et cetera. And not that, obviously, you and I don't have a massive passion for basketball, and Jacko from his coaching days, in the NCAA. But I know, and I think I speak for at least the three of us, there's a massive passion for baseball for you, for me, for Jacko. Jack's told me a million times that as much as he loves basketball, he would love to be able to call baseball games. You've called baseball games. Baseball was the sport that I played. You said till 20. It was right around the same for me, 18, 19 years old, playing right up until college and loving the game. And I know still to this day, when I have a chance to go to the game and, whether it was Tom and Jerry before, who I sat in the booth with many times, or whether it was, Alan Ashby and Mike Wilner and now Ben Wagner, anytime I get a chance to go in the booth or even to just go in with the guys post-game for a couple of minutes to talk with them, is such a thrill, and it's something I would love to have an opportunity to do. Not that I don't love what I'm doing, but there's just that passion for baseball, and there's something about it that I've never had the opportunity to broadcast like you have baseball games, and I would love to be able to do it, and I appreciate and respect everything that you've gone through to get to this point where you started, for those that might be just joining us, where you started talking about the baseball broadcast and being able to tell stories, which helps you then paint the picture and helps you build the broadcast, as opposed to the helter-skelter sometimes that exists in basketball and hockey where everything is so fast-paced.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that it's evolved too so much because of the distractions that we have now as viewers. And, baseball, it's interesting. I used to, actually, I don't know where I found it, but I used to be able to purchase these old cassette tapes of calls from back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Red Barber, Mel Allen, Vin Scully back in the day, before there was all the stats and analytics that everybody would use. I wanted to hear, what did they say and what did they do to fill all that airspace, right? And so, it's interesting. I say that it's changed because there's almost more of a premium today, I think, more than ever, about calling the game play-by-play than just talking over the action, because you want people's eyeballs to be on the screen, and you want to have inflections and different things to get people to look back up at the television screen, because most people are watching on a secondary screen, right? they're paying attention. They're looking at stats and everything. And so I was always cognizant of that from filling in on baseball. Like, Eric Smith comes set at the belt, here's the pitch, swung on, ground ball hit sharply over to second base, gobbled up by the second baseman, thrown over to first, but, out by half a step. But you want to use different inflections, different things to kind of